My name is Martin Matter with the Witness to War Foundation. It is March 27th, 2014, and we are in Hiawassee, Georgia. I'm sitting with Mr. Robert von der Osten, ROBERT, VONDEROSTEN, served in the European theater of World War II in the United States Navy on LST 388. How are you doing today, Robert?
Doing all right.
Glad to hear it. My first question is, where are you from originally?
Originally, I'm from Staten Island, New York.
And could you tell me about your life growing up before you joined the military?
Growing up on Staten Island?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, I went to grammar school and went to high school there. And I used to have to take the Staten Island ferry boat after I graduated. Through a friend of my father's, I got a office boy's job in Radio City. It was first opened, and on the RCA building, the 23rd floor. And I worked there until the war, and then I volunteered for the Navy.
Had anybody in your family been a part of the military before you?
Yeah, my father was in World War I, and he was in the Navy too. And he was a gunner's mate.
And do you remember Pearl Harbor Day and where you were?
Yes. And Pearl Harbor Day, we were, let's see, we were riding to the Staten Island ferry and in New York, and it came over the radio, and I don't know, for all of a sudden they put restrictions on everything because it was really part of New York City, but it's a country part. So that's all I can tell you that. And before you knew it, by the next day they had gun emplacements on top of the tall buildings, and there was a continuous movement of everything, and that's about it. Well, then two or three weeks after Pearl Harbor, I volunteered for the Navy. The thing was, and in the draft I was 4F. Then the Army said I had flat feet, so then I went into the Navy, and they took me right in because we were at war, and there I was. They sent me up to Noroton, Connecticut, to boot camp, and we was there 3 months, and they sent me down to Virginia to a new outfit called the Amphibious Force. Nobody knew what the Amphibious Force was, but it really means going on the sea and going on the land both. And it turned out to be, I was finally, after recruiting, I wound up on a large landing craft called an LST 388. At that time, they didn't even have a name. So we practiced on the Chesapeake Bay, landing that big ship, 325 foot long. Lost a couple of stern anchors because they weren't familiar with it. And then we headed to New York, and they put a little LCT, 100 foot long, on the deck. We were in the Bayonne Navy Yard. And then we were off for Africa. We stopped at Bermuda, and that British thing at the beginning of the Mediterranean, everybody knows it, and I just, well, anyhow, we stopped there. It's only a small British possession. And then we went over to Oran in North Africa.
I'm going to pause you for 1 second. I'd like to
Okay.
go back and talk about your amphibious force training. What all do you remember about that?
About the amphibious force?
Uh-huh.
Well, I was in there for 3 years. But we established the first amphibious base. We went to Oran, and then we went up to a small port called Arzu, and we had all the equipment to establish an amphibious base. The Germans still had all of Libya, and the first battle there, the Americans lost, but they regrouped, and from then on, they moved up the coast of Africa towards Tunisia, and we helped them by bringing supplies and bringing men to the local ports because the Germans had destroyed all the bridges when they retreated. And we finally wound up in Tunisia, Bizerta. And Bizerta was a big staging area for the invasion of Sicily. And we practiced in the huge lake they have there for a harbor. And then we really had air raids every night. And the big flares, they would float down on parachutes, and you could light up the whole bay. So, but then after about 2 months up there practicing and that, we went on the invasion of Sicily. That was the first thing in Europe that was invaded. So the Germans by that time had been pushed out of North Africa. And then the British and the Americans invaded the island of Sicily.
What do you remember about that invasion?
And where that invasion was, there were German air raids, and it went pretty good. And General Patton, he came from one end, that was the American troops, and Montgomery came from the other side, and Patton was a tough guy. He didn't want to bow to Montgomery, so he made sure he got to Palermo, the capital of Sicily, first and captured it, and he made it. So then we created a base in Palermo and that, and went back to Bizerta, and then we took off, and we the big battle just south of Rome, just in my tongue.
Salerno?
Huh?
Salerno?
Salerno. Yeah, that was one of the toughest battles.
What was tough about it?
I think that somebody let them know we were coming, and we almost had to withdraw, but they finally got in there, and about 5 or 6 more. That was a famous place, a place called Casino, where we were stalled from going up the. So we went on another invasion, 10 miles in back of the German lines. Anyhow, we got in there. The Germans never suspected us. Anzio, and we ran a couple of runs up there, but the Germans were trying to eliminate that salient, but we hung on to it. Then, when that was secure, we went back to Bizerta and regrouped with convoy, and we went up to Ireland, North Ireland, which was where we doubled the gunpowder on the ship. We got 20 millimeters and more aircrafts then, and we had the big 3-inch gun they took off. And then we went down to Wales. Let me see. That's so long ago. And we went into, we went on practice landings. And I got it in the book. We practiced landings. And anyhow, they got the communications screwed up. And on our practice invasion, we had, I think it was 6 big landing craft, LSTs, in this practice landing. It was, the place was supposed to be familiar to Normandy. Geez, I had it in the tip of my tongue. But anyhow, we just kept going, and German E-boats came in. Then there wasn't supposed to be any action, but it was just practice. But enemy E-boats were like PT boats. They came in, and these LSTs had about 350 people or soldiers on each one of them. And you know, they torpedoed 3 LSTs in back of us. And they lost 900 American soldiers. And by the time our forces woke up and sent out their own PT boats, the Germans were gone. And these people were all in the water. They drowned. And the other LSTs, the front ones like us, and the 3, kept on going to the practice landings. And when it was found out that what really happened there, the British were on a different radio signals. The destroyers and stuff, British. They were supposed to be protecting us. And we were warned that if we spoke about what happened within 25 years, they would put us in jail. So nobody spoke about it. Well, anyhow, after that, we, on June 6th, we loaded up in Southampton, England, with troops and equipment, and went in a convoy, and a big storm came up when we started out. And so we had to play out the storm, and they delayed the landing at Omaha Beach for, I don't know, to the next morning. And then we went into Omaha Beach, and there was a lot of casualties. And I was a radio man, but I was assigned to the wheelhouse. And the wheelhouse had, and the captain was on the flying bridge. So I had a first talk to the captain, and they had the portholes closed with just slits in them. And so we could see everything going on, but we were protected unless they sunk the ship, then we were sunk. They sunk several LSTs. And we saw how the whole operation went, and it didn't look so good. So we started in to the beach, and we got, I don't know how, we got halfway in from where we were gathered, and they told us that the beach was taken back again, that we got to reverse. They put it on the radio, the flag signals and everything to reverse our course. And a destroyer come along and put all smoke in front of us. So we reversed off, and about 2 hours, 3 hours later, we went finally in and unloaded on the beach. And they were supposed to have secured that beach some, but they were still fighting on that beach. And some of the equipment and tanks and that, they went off the ship, hit landmines, and got destroyed. And we had, I think it was 10 doctors on board to bring the wounded back to England. So they kept bringing them in on what we call a tank deck. And we had 10 doctors on board who used the mess tables for operating tables. And they were operating on those guys all the way back, and we had a whole tank deck full of wounded. And when we came into Southampton with the wounded, we had a very dull blue light on the masthead, so that we got a preference. And after that, we took more troops back, and I don't know, we made 30 or 40 trips across the English Channel, bringing supplies, tanks, troops, and some of them were called Gurkhas. They came from India, I think, and they were some characters. They couldn't speak English. We couldn't, and they were they belonged to the English, and we even towards the end we brought railroad cars, because the tracks had a different size in France than the regular Americans did, and that was quite a trip. But that was after we were established in there, and I guess we made 30 or 40 trips across the Channel.
Now, were you worried about any German submarines or anything attacking you?
Oh yeah, there was ships that were hit on the way. You know, that's the English Channel you cross. And then Patton, he was a rough character. But he was a good general, and he landed in the south of France, and he came all the way up. But what happened was, he was running out of gasoline. So that's when they loaded our ship with barrels of gasoline, and we had to go up the Seine River in France. We were going just, I think it was Rouen or something like that, where they pushed out dirt made what they call like hards, and we landed there, and they unloaded all this gasoline. We were glad to get rid of it, because the German planes were still around. There weren't that many, but there were. And boy, to hit us, we would have gone up to heaven quick. So after about 30, 40 trips, then we went up to Londonderry and in North Ireland, and got supplies and stuff, and it was towards the end of the war in Europe, and we went back to the United States, and we went to New Orleans. Half the convoy went to New York, where I lived, and the other half went to New Orleans, and of course I went to New Orleans. But they gave me a 30-day leave. It was the only 30-day leave in almost 4 years that I had. And so I got home. Then we went back and picked up the ship. They had taken it off, and they had put 2 masts on the LST 300 feet apart and put a cable through to the mast and a boom. It went out, and they put 2 Piper Cubs on the deck, and it had a thing on the top with a hook, and they hoisted the Piper Cubs up, because there were no helicopters then, up, and somehow they got it out, and they pulled it all the way back to the stern of the ship with some nylon cord. And the Army pilot for the Piper Cub, he revved the motor up, and then waved his hand, and we talked to him on the radio. He was ready. He said, go. So they released this thing, and it went sailing down this nylon trapeze like, and when it hit the end, it went off, and it dropped to about 10 feet in the water and took off. It was, the pilot had raced it up, and we had 2 like that. The only trouble was they couldn't land back on again. So I don't know where they landed, but they didn't come back to the ship. And they was used as spotters, for the Army. But then Germany surrendered. So on my only 30-day leave, I got married. So that gave me 10 points. So we went back to New Orleans, and the ship was going to go through the Panama Canal to the Pacific, to Hawaii and over to the Japanese War. And they found out, they said I had enough points because I got married to get out. And so they made up the papers, and they put me ashore in New Orleans base there. And when I showed them the papers, they said, you didn't have these made out right. I said, well, I can't go back. The ship went off for the canal. Well, she said, sit down. I sat there for about 2 hours, and then they sent me as a draft to New York, and I wound up in Long Island at the discharge base, and they kept me there, brainwashed me, for about 3 days, and then they put me out. Then I got out. And the war ended just about the day I got out. The war in Japan ended, so I wouldn't have been in it anyhow. Later on, I saw a picture of the ship, and it was at the Bikini Atoll where they had the first atom bomb. So they say that it was radioactive, so they towed it out to the deep Pacific and sunk it. That's the story. After that, I went back to work for Standard Oil in Radio City, worked there a couple of years in marine insurance and hated it. And so then I went in the New York Police Department. I was there for 20 years. I got a college degree, and by that I was a sergeant in the New York Police Department. I had to put in 20 years up in Manhattan by Times Square and just above, in Brooklyn and Staten Island, and retired in 20 years. And I went down with where my wife came from, and I went to Jacksonville. I had a BS degree, so I went to Jacksonville State University, got qualified for a school teacher, and I taught school, 8th grade, for another 16 years when good old George Wallace was the governor, and he gave me all my Navy time on my pension fund if I would pay my part that I would have paid, So in 16 years, I got another 20-year pension, And then I went, we moved to Ormond Beach, and I got a retirement job. I thought it was in the Tomoka State Prison, testing prisoners to see if they were learning enough to get a high school or, equivalency diploma. I only did that for 2 years. That was crazy. And then I went back and worked for General Electric on a retirement job. They had 5 buildings in Daytona Beach, and they were associated with the atom bomb stuff, and the satellite stuff, the space program. Then did that a little while, a couple of years, and then they wanted me work nights, so I quit. I didn't need to work, and I've been, I then moved up here 20 years ago, and here I am.
Could you tell me about the big scare?
About the what?
The big scare.
The big what?
The ship in the fog.
The ship in what?
In the fog.
In the fog?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that was big scare? Well, I'm telling you, when we were in port in England, you anchored outside until they called you in. Well, it was nighttime. We were anchored there waiting to be called in. Well, it got all foggy. Well, the radio was secured. We couldn't use the radio, so we substituted for signalmen on the bridge. We could, now the radio man knew the Morse code so that he could use the light, and he could, as well as the radio. So all you had to learn is a little bit about the flags, and we learned semaphore, so we secured the radio and were on the bridge. Well, when we were anchored, we only left one man up there as a lookout and a man on the bow. Well, I was up there by myself, and it was kind of foggy. I couldn't even see the guy on the bow. And all of a sudden, this big ship, it was a big freighter, it was unloaded, appeared right off our bow, heading right for us. Well, I just, it was a shock, because I jumped down to the bridge, and there's an alarm you pull. I pulled the alarm and hung on, and people came out of the hatches and all over, to secure the ship. So of course it was, if they hit us, they could have cut us in half. And that ship came along and scraped the side of our ship and took part of the couple of lifeboats away, and kept right on going. And we had to go to the shipyard, be patched up, and then we were all right. But if I hadn't, when you pull that switch, the alarm goes off, and they all had their station where they locked the watertight doors. But that was a scary thing. So that's about it.
I'd like to hear more about the invasion at Anzio. What all could you tell me about what you saw, what happened to you during the Anzio invasion?
Well, let me see. The trouble is, when you're in the invasion, you have all these guns on the ship. They're aircraft guns. Well, whatever goes up comes down. So we had a number of casualties, but they probably came from our own shells. So they, you get 30, 40 ships all shooting in the air. The Germans used to come over at midnight, you know, drop a flare, you know, and then to check and everybody shot at them. Well, they also had another problem. When they followed some plane down, they cleared it off the deck of another ship. So we had brackets put up. They just could bring them just so far down, but it was all in it just, you know, they had to learn all that stuff. And what else can I tell you?
Was there a lot of friendly fire hitting your ship?
Huh?
Was there a lot of friendly fire hitting your ship, or did nobody get killed due to friendly fire?
The Germans, they were up so high that they dropped bombs, but by the time we invaded Normandy, their Air Force was depleted quite a bit, and our Air Force was pretty much in control. So, but they shot down a lot of bombers, of our bombers. That's, what else can I tell you?
What's the strangest thing you ever saw while you were overseas?
What?
The strangest thing you ever saw?
The strangest thing? I don't know about the strangest thing I ever saw. I don't know, one of the worst experiences I had is when we came up from Africa up to Londonderry. We passed the coast of Portugal, is it? Yeah, and we ran into a big storm. I'm telling you, if that didn't scare you, we'd go up in the air and, you know, the two propellers would come out of the water and we'd smash down, and then the deck cracked right across. I said, oh my God, this thing's they're gonna break in half. But luckily, we didn't break in half. So that was the scariest thing. Other than that, I don't know. There wasn't a lot of comedy that took place in that ship. So that's all I can tell you. What can I tell you?
Did you have any leader or individual that inspired you while you fought in the war?
That what now?
That inspired you.
That followed me.
Inspired?
Inspired me?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. There was 3 of us radio men and 3 signal men and a radar man. Oh, they sent us to radar school too in England. No, we had some pretty good officers, and I don't know, everybody was pretty loyal and dedicated, as I can remember. I don't remember anybody being, you know, we had one fellow, though this was funny. It wasn't funny for him, but we had what you call strikers that were just new radio operators. Well, this poor guy started to get seasick. And I never saw anybody so sick in my life. He'd lay on the floor and throw up, and I said, we gotta get this guy out of here, get him out of the radio room. So we did, and then they took him off the ship, and I guess they put him ashore. But did you ever see somebody seasick? Oh boy, some of those guys, it was terrible. Those soldiers, they'd rather go overboard than go through it. Because, you know, the LST was shallow draft because it ran up on the beach. And when we got to England, when we ran up on the beach, we had big pontoons on each side, and we hit the beach, and the pontoons went ahead, and they had the CBs on them, and they lashed them to the bow doors so they could get the jeeps and stuff off. When we were over there in Africa and over in Sicily, we lost some of these soldiers because there's a just before you come, if you went swimming, just about 30 feet out, there's a sandbar on every beach. And then the water gets deep and then it's up again. Well, when the LST was so big, it hit the sandbar and then put its bow door, but it didn't reach all the way to shore. And any number of trucks and jeeps that went off went. And that's all. What other exciting things can I tell you? None. But I tell the Germans had some what do you call those things that light up the whole works, and they float down on a parachute. They put these flares on a parachute, and it lit up the whole convoy like for about 3 minutes. See, well, in 3 minutes we could see them up there, but they saw us, and they dropped some. They were so high you couldn't hit them, and they dropped a few bombs and probably took pictures, and one disappeared.
Did they ever hit you or another ship?
Huh?
Did they ever hit you or another ship?
No, we were hit on the port side, but it didn't mount or nothing. It was a near miss, but I was lucky. Oh my gosh, was I lucky.
Well, were there any other stories you were looking to tell? Anything that might have slipped your mind for the moment?
Huh?
Anything that might have slipped your mind, or another story you want to tell?
No, I'll probably think of it when I get home.
Well, it's been a real honor and a pleasure to get to speak to you today. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time, but most importantly, I'd like to thank you very much for your service.
Okay. Well,